Department of Anthropology at the Smithsonian Institution, and also a lecturer and mentor in anthropology at, is it George Washington?
Yeah.
And other places, most
America.
likely, in America. He's researched and published on numerous topics in physical anthropology, paleopathology, morphometrics, genetics, etc., and his forensic anthropology, such as mass graves, facial reconstruction, and mummification, which we're going to hear more about tonight. He has been part of archaeological excavations in Mongolia, Italy, and multiple sites in the United States. Currently, his interests and exhibits, current and projected exhibits, are ancient Egyptian mummies, life, religion, and mummification practices, interpretation of early colonial American life through the skeletons from Jamestown and other early American settlements. So I'd like to introduce him, but right before I do, there was also a small story that Peg told us about when she talked with you, that she asked if whether you wanted to talk about mummies or your forensic work, and you suggested that that the slides that you would show for the forensic work might not be what we want to have to say. So tonight we're going to...
Especially the lamb ribs.
The lamb ribs. That's really great. So let's give a warm welcome to David.
Let's hope so. How are you all this evening?
Good.
Good? You got the you all part from my 10 years in Tennessee, working at the, as many of you know it, as the body farm with Richard Dance and Bill Bass. And so I'm not going to show you any of those slides because they're less for dinner, I guess. So tonight, I have to do the... There we go. Tonight I'm going to talk about mummy research at the Smithsonian Institution, and this will be predominantly associated with the exhibit that just has come up, the second portion of it in November, Eternal Life in Ancient Egypt. If you haven't been there, come, because there's also the Human Origins Hall and the Written in Bone, the Chesapeake 17th century forensic studies. That will only be up until January of next year, so if you want to see that, you better. Okay. Let's see if I can get all of this right. No, we didn't include that one. Preserved human bodies, or mummies, come from around the world. From North America, South America, Oceania, Asia, the Arctic, and Europe. Many of these bodies are accidental, being preserved by special environments, such as this one here that was in a copper mine, and so the cupric salts actually preserved the body because he got stuck in one of the veins and then these are culturally induced. Here's the Iceman, who was, of course, an accidental. But many of them, as you see here, are culturally induced. The preservation is enhanced by human intervention, either by drying or applying chemicals, to reduce the bacterial and insect activity, or to alter the decomposition by removal of the internal organs and fluid drainage, those kind of things. But for most of us, when we hear the word mummy, we think of Egyptian mummies. And we certainly have been indoctrinated into the myths of mummies, the curses of mummies, and the splendors of and the extent of the treasures that are found with Egyptian mummies. With the recent renovation of the Western Civilization Hall at the Natural History Museum, this allowed us the opportunity to construct a new exhibit on eternal life of ancient Egypt. And in this exhibit, can represent the traditions and practices for preparing and assisting the soul to the afterlife. And this was not a one-time thing, but actually was part of the Egyptian daily life, with prayers and gifts to the gods, pilgrimages to sanctuaries and temples, and the preparation of the body to the final eternal resting place for the soul. The origins of the afterlife derive from the natural preservation of the body discovered in the early dynastic periods, these ones that you see up over here. Although the hot, dry sand worked as a natural preservation for the preservation environment, religious and social beliefs considered that these were good people or incorruptible, and their soul would have passed the test of purity when it was weighed against the feather of truth, such as you see here, and the religion involved. Your eternal organs were given as votive gifts to the son of Horus, and if they approved, then Horus would take your spirit and bring it to the afterlife to be presented to Osiris and Isis. Then your soul went to the eternal land of the rest, where in most people's dreams they had a nice farm along the Nile, and all those little chakis that they would put in there with them were their servants that provided them all of their needs. As time passed from the Old Kingdom to the New Kingdom, the techniques of mummification greatly improved, becoming an art that was restricted only really to the priests. And thus the whole process became steeped and controlled by religious sects and became a controlling factor in the social and cultural paradigms. The Egyptian culture was amazing, and its sophistication was amazing too. Two quick examples. In art, representation of the living were green or yellow for females, green for males. This was the way that they depicted a person during their life. But in death, they made the face black. Now, why would they do that? Well, it was because using the bitumen and the other resins, the face turns a blackish color. And so this was their representation of, and this is Osiris in a story of him during his life, and Osiris as the lord of the underworld, as he was dead. Daily life. Most Egyptians wore eyeliner as a protection from the light, from the bright sun and the reflection of the light off of the sand in the Egyptian desert. The eyeliner was generally made from brown malachite, this copper derivative here, and it was sure that in the Egyptian time they didn't know about bacteria and microbes, but they had learned from practice that using this malachite paste, around the eyes, they had less eye infections. Well, certainly the cupric salts that are in there are an antibacterial agent. And you can see this is staphylococcus on a petri dish right here, and you can see these are little dollops of this malachite paste, and there is no staphylococcus around it, so it works as an antibacterial. The wonderful thing about preservation of Egyptian mummies, and all the other mummies that we look at from around the world, are fantastic to do research because it allows us to have the opportunity to look at the history of diseases and the health of, in particularly, ancient Egypt. In this example here, you can see by rehydrating the tissues, you can look at the tissues itself and identify cancer. Schistosomiasis is an endemic disease even today, but it was an epidemic in many instances in many time periods in Egypt. And this is a histological slide showing the bladder, a bladder tissue in which you have the deposit of eggs that are taking place of the worms that get into the human, under the human tissue, and then are depositing the eggs in your internal organs, of which then they hatch, and the little larvae get back into the water and deposit themselves in the shell here. With schistosomiasis, organ failure eventually will take place after all of the scar tissue begins to build up in your liver, in your kidneys, and in your intestines. The only way that this parasitic disease can be controlled is to get rid of some part of the cycle. And so by treating the water to get rid of or try to reduce the amount of water shell that's in the Nile, that will help to break this cycle. However, you can see that even today people stand in the Nile River doing their irrigation, and so they're still exposed to these worms that get into the system. We can also document things such as looking at sickle cell anemia. These are a couple individuals that come from different time periods when they had smallpox epidemics. We can look at congenital disease such as club foot in this particular individual, and warfare or accidental trauma that people sustain, such as these nice little holes in the skull of this person from a battle axe. See, that's one of those slides that that borders on the line there. In previous centuries, to study mummified human remains required the destruction of the mummy and a good deal of the information by the unwrapping and the dissection was destroyed. And then you also didn't have a wonderful mummy to still use to exhibit for people. But industrious and visionary investigators, such as Sir Flinders Petrie, employed the use of new methods, such as X-ray radiography in 1912, only 15 years after X-rays had been designed and implemented, and to study many of the mummies that are at the British Museum. It was some of the first non-destructive analysis of mummies that had been done. In 1991, we took a bunch of mummies, 5 of them, over to George Washington University Medical Center in, by the way, in U-Haul. They don't allow us to show those pictures anymore. But we did a systematic study of these mummies from the Smithsonian and investigating the features of sex, age, cause of death, and other evidence for health and disease, and in some instances, the old treatments of putting mummies back together again with some wire. Plain film radiography helps immensely in the study of mummies because it is a non-destructive method. But one has to be actually pretty well trained in being knowledgeable about morphology to be able to read radiographic images, since the layering of the three-dimensional image is now compacted down onto 2 dimensions, and you get this overlay that often it should show artifacts of density that's very hard to decipher. In the 1960s, computer-assisted axial tomography, or CAT scanning, was developed. And in the early 1970s, the first commercial machines had been produced, and within a year, Egyptian mummies were being run through the CT scanners. Now, what CT is, and how many of you are medical scientists, etc., so I don't really have to spend time. Oh, good. How many of you have been CT scanned before? That ought to be a little different. There you go. Okay. It is also X-ray, but the beam is going through the body by the tube being rotated around in the 360 degrees. So when you go through that tube, you see that thing spinning. And these days now it's done as a spiral rather than a slice, and then you move the table in a slice and move the table that you had. So what you're doing is you get it 360 degrees, so you're getting a virtual slice that the computer picks the X and Y coordinates and reproduces the densities, which produces the image. Then the table is moved, and you get the next slice, and the next slice, and the next slice, and pretty soon you have not only an X and a Y, but you also have a Z coordinate that you can then have the computer repack everything back together again. So you can get 2-dimensional, or you can get 3-dimensional images. So here now we have on site, donated by Siemens Labs, a CT scanner that's there in our department, so we get to do all sorts of fun stuff with it. And it's not just for anthropology, it's for all of the museums. So we've done violins, the Stradivari violins over the American history. We've done artwork, we've done rare books, we've done and insects at amber and that kind of stuff. So you can, and animals from the zoo. So you can see in a 2-dimensional slice, such as going through here, you can see the bottom of the foot, you can see the bones, you can see tissues, you can see the wrappings here, you can see the tree, the wood and the tree rings that are in there, and then the filler that they use to fill in to make the coffin. So all these things we can now see, construction, all these things, and we haven't done any damage to the mummy at all. Also, because you have that multi-planar kind of setup, the orthogonal lines, we can cut right smack dab down the middle of the mummy and see essentially a complete sagittal cut, seeing the spine, the brain, the skull where the brain is removed, the fractures of where the brain was removed from the ethmoid here, the removal of the internal organs, the collapse of the abdomen, which then has been refilled with all of this linen packing. And with the spine that we can see here, we can see that it's actually in pretty good shape. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But these days, now we can make everything in 3 dimensions. And with the technology that we have with multi-planar sub-millimeter imaging, we can now take and produce 3-dimensional images that can be manipulated by the computer and rotated, as you can see here. And then the densities can be changed so you can see the various different objects that are there in there. I just did that. I wish I could do that video. I don't understand how to do the video things on PowerPoint yet, so I have to live with the old guard trying to do some of this stuff. Now, animal mummies. The exhibit provided us the opportunity to show a whole bunch of the animal mummies that we have in the collections. We probably have 50, 60, which is a very small handful compared to what the British Museum has. But this gave us a greater opportunity to be able to look at all of these things using CT study because we were going to put them up on exhibit. So you can see that we have 2 exhibit cases that show about the animal mummies and the various different reasons that people were taking these as votive gifts. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have several cat mummies. How many of you are cat lovers? Okay, well, you'll have to live with me on this one. This is from the later dynastic period, actually Greco-Roman period, and this is indicative by the fact that they have this very geometric pattern wrapping that you see here. The head is made of a mixture of sand and bitumen applied over a linen base that is placed and wrapped around the cat's head. The body has been mummified and the legs are flexed up to the chest, and the forelimbs are down in front of the legs as you see them going here. Not in this image, or you can't see it in this image. The neck is broken. That was the way that they euthanized the cat before they mummified the cat. All right. The size of the cat and the developmental stages that could be seen in the dentition indicate that it was a young kid. This was a really young kid. Bastet was the god that was represented by a cat. And Bastet was seen as a wily and nimble individual, as we think of cats today, unless you have a big meatloaf that sits at home. And she was important in helping the soul to make its way through the various different stages to the afterlife. So you would want to give a gift to this god to help you to the afterlife. In the Egyptian religion, rebirth was extremely important. And as an example, the sun being born each day and carried across the sky, and then being deposited and swallowed by wood for the next day to be reborn and go over the sky again. Also, the soul would leave the body during the day and return back at night. In this particular one, this is a votive gift of which it looks like an egg. And inside is an ibis. The ibis is finally wrapped, again with this crisscrossing, overlapping weaving of the linens. And this is very traditional of the Greco-Roman period as well. The ibis was the animal that represented Thoth, who was the scribe of ancient Egypt. And you wanted to give a gift to him because he's the one who's going to write your name on the list to be able to get you to the afterlife. So you wanted to give him a gift to make sure that something, that we were in good stead. And so with the CT scanner, you can see we've now cut open the jar, and we've seen that mummy on the inside, and then by changing the densities, we can also see the animal inside, and you can see the long beak of the ibis here with the wings and the legs here wrapped up. So this gives us, again, an opportunity to be able to have that whole complete thing, mummy, and that container, and then be able to open it up and look at it without actually having to open it up. But there was a great market for these mummies. The manufacture and the sale was controlled by the priests because only they could do it, so you know who was making the money. And many of the pilgrims coming there to make their supplications to the gods could not afford a full mummy. But that's okay. If you had parts or pieces or even something that looked like a votive gift, you were doing pretty good. Okay? Because everybody was going. An example here, you can see that this wrapping here looks like a modestly done full ibis. But when we CT scanned it, all that's in there is a wing and a leg. And the wing is very addictive. This is very obviously by our bird experts. They identify this as being ibis because of these foramina that you see right here, very indicative of that particular species. But also you can see these little lines, and that's where the femur was snapped off of the body and then packed in there. So you've got the fractures that you see right here. Plus all of these things here, the quills for the quill feathers off of the wing. What they would do with these, instead of trying to remove the organs and all that kind of stuff, what they had is they had a really big vat of hot resin, bitumen resin. And they would take and they would just put it in, and the heat would cook the meat, so they didn't have to take the meat off. And then the resin itself works as a sealant, and it sealed everything up. So a lot of birds and other animals you will find in this kind of state where you can actually go back and look at the feathers and look at other things because they're embedded in this bitumen. Okay, now here's a baboon. This one's in 2D imaging, and it shows nothing but bundles of wrappings inside in this little supportive stick that's right here. Now, this is a 2,000-year-old item. This is not a modern fake. But whether the pilgrim knew or didn't know whether there was a baboon inside is still a question. Most likely they knew that it was not, because in the later time period, such as this one comes from, baboons had already been mummified up into extinction in Egypt. And so there were no baboons, and anybody who could have a real baboon, it had to be shipped in from Sudan. And so it was very, very expensive. So most likely they knew that this was just a representation of the god Hapi, and they were giving it as a votive gift with the knowledge that there was nothing inside of it. But something that had things inside of it, this is really a geek fest for the Smithsonian folks. This was a bundle that was found in the sanctuary that was represented by different reptiles. Okay, and in looking at it, you could see that there was a snake bundled up in this. Okay, so you can see the snake here, and in this different density values you can see here too. But as I was working to try to identify the particular species of the snake, I kept looking at the vertebrae, because the vertebrae are sometimes diagnostic for that particular thing. And you kind of look at it, and then all of a sudden I went, oh, wait, there's another piece of vertebra right here, and wait, there's a tail that goes here along with the tail of the snake. So there's a shrew right in here. You can see the head here. Here's the vertebra, the backbone right here. Here's the hips right here. The front arms coming off here. Here's the tail coming down here and ending down there. So,
Dinner.
Dinner, absolutely. This mouse or shrew is inside, and when we rotate it around, you can see it's inside of the ribs of the snake. So it was definitely the dinner beforehand. And what's fascinating to look at is the head is harder to see than the rest of the body, and the tail is in really good shape. Well, how does a snake swallow its prey? Head first, right? So actually what we're seeing here is the digestion of this shrew, where the head isn't as clear because it's beginning to be digested. And it's a little bit more digested here than it is here and than it is here. And so you've got now this animal inside, and you can follow that up. Well, what's fun about this is we can also tell by the particular species of this that this was approximately 2 days before the dispatching of the snake to make the mummy. So he had had his meal a couple days before. Again, I said this is sort of a geek fest for us, because we've got all of these other guys who are the rodent specialist and the snake specialist and one of the zoo archaeologists, and we're all looking around the computer and going, oh, look at that. So, oops. Okay. We're lucky enough to be the only museum in the world that has 2 bull mummies. Not even Cairo has 2. This particular mummy is actually the smaller of the 2, but he still doesn't fit through the CT scanner. So how do you study a big bull mummy? Well, we got the folks over in Kodak to bring one of their industrial X-ray machines, a digital X-ray machine, in which the plates are 6 feet long and 48 inches wide, and they're usually used for structural looking at structural things in wings of airplanes and supports in buildings and that kind of thing. So with only 2 X-rays, we could get a whole mummy. And you can see here's the head of the bull, and then there's all this jumbled bone. Well, what we're seeing here, in the written documentations from way back when, the ceremony to give a gift to Amun-Ra, the sun god, was a bull. But the priest got to have a good party beforehand, and they would eat the bull and then take all the bones and pile them up into and make it look like a mummy. So here we go, and this gives you the example of what's going on here. This is a really interesting and fun thing to do as well. Okay. Now, in this exhibit, it gave us the ability to present an overview of the science that goes into studying mummies. I'm looking at my watch and I realize I only have 10 more minutes and I've got 40 more slides. So, I'll have this. All right, so Andrew, that one guy that you saw that we were rotating around, we wanted to know on this particular individual and present this to the public, looking at the sex, the age, mummification methods, and then experimenting with the facial relivening of this individual. So, what you're seeing here is the pelvis of Andrew. Of course, I'm giving you, what he is anyhow. But males and female pelvises are slightly different from one another due to the fact that you have to, have the birth canal in females that is not necessary in males. And so this dictates the morphology. So you can see that the male is more triangular, the female is more oval. You have a different shape, more triangular versus more square in the pubis. The subpubic angle is broader in females and narrow in males. And the sacrum is wider, has wider wings in females and shorter wings in the male. So when you look at Andrew, he has the subpubic angle that's narrow. He has short pubic bones. He has a triangular pelvic inlet. He has the triangular pubes. And his sciatic notch is narrow, as you see in males versus females. So we have a pretty good knowledge, even without having to take them apart and see if we can see genitalia, that it's a male. The cranium, the skull, is also different between males and females, usually by size. Okay? So males have a more square end of the chin. They have larger cheekbones. They have a larger brow ridge than females do, and it usually slopes a little bit more on the frontal than it does on the female, and the muscle attachments that you see here are different in size between the males and the females. Okay? So, in Andrew, all of these features that you're going to see here are all the things that you would see as a male, and so this confirms what we already find. One little caveat that I have here is this is the catalog number written on the outside of the and here as well. It's written in lead-based paint, and so of course with the X-rays you get this nice little artifact that shows up. Okay, looking on the inside, you can see these small little sharp edges that are along the vertebrae. Okay, these are enthesophytes. Everybody gets them as you get older in age. And you can see 20-year-olds have this nice round hair, 30, 35, the 40, it starts getting this sharp edge, and then you start getting these true enthesophytes growing when you're in your 50s, and wow, when you get to 60s and older. We all suffer that. But when you look at these from the X-ray, you can see, from the CT scan, you can see that this person falls in the 30s, mid to later 30s. Okay? Dental wear, other features are also indicative of that age. Also, we can see with the mummification practice, all the internal organs were removed. They had to repack the area with the abdomen where it was collapsing. And you can see that the tissues are actually in pretty good shape. And the intervertebral discs are still in good shape as well. And so we can use that to look at the health of this individual. But in cross-section, we can see these, this is the spine right here. You've got these extra rolls, linen rolls. And when you look at it from the 3D CT, you can see there's one roll here, a second one, and a third one here. These are all linen bundles that were put inside of the chest and the abdomen to fill it back out, and also they had natron that was in them, the salt, to keep it dry. So you can see with this cross-section here, you can see those things. And again, this is why CT scanning is so much more indicative of looking and making these particular types of investigations, because in regular X-ray, you might see these as sort of ghosts, but you really can't do a cross-section. You can't see the design and shape of these particular things. You can also see that the brain has been removed, and this is resin that's been poured inside there, and the bones of the ethmoid here are all broken out where they went up through the nose to remove the brain. Now, here's something. I worked down at as a consultant for free at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So I involved these folks in doing facial reconstructions of these mummies, both as just a practice and also as to show you all what can be done. So in this particular instance, this is Glenn Miller, who's there at the National Center, and he's using a sophisticated program that reapplies tissue back onto the face. This is generally done in forensic settings to rebuild the face after extensive disfigurement, either from bloating or from a car accident or something like that. So in this particular instance, you can see here's the photograph of Andrew. And then with Glenn layering down these and filling it back out, he begins to rebuild the face. And then once the face is essentially there, we relay down the bone, the skull, to make sure everything's fitting the way it should. And so we get a picture of what we would think of this individual in the living. Okay. The boy mummy. We wanted to better understand the story about this child. And so by CT scanning it, you can, first of all, you can see from just looking at it this child is in a very typical position for Greco-Roman, with the chin on the chest, the head tilted forward, the arms down to the side. But he's also a commoner. He was not of high status, so you don't have the thin linen wraps going around the arms and the fingers and whatever. He's just in this large linen wrap. So he was of what normally was going on, because you have to remember that back in the ancient Egyptian days, this is all religiously based, so everybody was mummified at some level, no matter what your status was. So, you can see here that the convention for mummification meant that everyone was going to be preserved, and sometimes the preparation houses got a little backed up, and so sometimes the body might sit around a little while, which led to the beginning of decay, because we're in Egypt, it's nice and hot. And also keep in mind that the lower classes would have been put aside to let the higher classes get fixed first. So this little boy has gone through a little bit of decay, and the head was coming off, and so they put this wooden dowel up through the neural canal of the neck to be able to reposition the head. Of course, in doing so, they also fractured the skull. So we see that, but we also see this in other mummies as well. This one comes from the University of Illinois, and you can see this fracturing that's also taken place. So it might have also been due to the positioning of the body after death. Okay, what about the age of this boy? Dental development is the most accurate and diagnostic tool for looking at subjects, with the development and growth of the deciduous and then permanent dentition being the factors that we use to study. So, adjusting our densities, and we can elucidate out the teeth that you see here. Here's the deciduous teeth, baby teeth, and here are the permanent teeth growing in the alveolus, beginning to make their way out. Looking at it, here's a lateral side. You can see the molars coming in here and the other teeth that are out here. Okay, using that position here, we can see in the chart on a gross level, we have the molars coming in here, we have the dentition coming in here, all of the baby teeth are still in. So we know that it is not an 18-monther, we know it's not a 6-monther, it falls around 3 years. Then we can get more specific in looking at this growth by the fact that there's a little bit of the root beginning to grow, such as you see in this one here. This one's not as long as you would expect to be a 4-year-old, but it's not really a 3-year-old. So it is actually a person about 3.5 years of age. Okay? That's important because we're trying to narrow this down, because the dentition is strongly controlled genetically. And whereas the development of the rest of the body, particularly the extremities, it can be more influenced by environmental effects, such as nutrition and disease. So by looking at the growth stages of the long bones in comparison to the dental age, it gives us some indication of the possibility of chronic illness and nutritional stress that this child might have been affected by. The long bone age, by the length of the long bone, the tibia here, is approximately 3.25 to 3.75. Falls approximately the same age as what we saw in the dentition. So most likely this child did not die of a chronic illness, but one of the acute illness such as pneumonia or some other type of epidemic that did not have enough time to actually affect the growth of the body. Okay, this is the lead up to the facial reconstruction. We have to have some idea of what population group this child belongs to. Well, in adults, we can see that there are facial differences between the various different population groups. Nasal shape, eye shape, frontal forwardness, nasal forwardness, the shape and the forwardness of cheekbones, the shape of the cranium itself. All these features are indicative for different population groups. More subtle, but they're still there in children. Okay, so you can see nasal shape differences here, cranial shape differences. Frontal forwardness is a little bit harder to see, but it's present there. So you see these features. Well, we look at our boy here, and we compare them, and you can see that it's a combination of African and Middle Eastern ancestry. which of course makes perfect sense. Egypt during this time was a very cosmopolitan area. There are people who are coming in and out. The last 200 years, before the Greco-Roman period, was the Nubian period, in which the Sudanese and the Ethiopians were coming up because they were the rulers. And there was always the influx coming from the Middle East of trade and warfare. So you are going to have this combination of the features that you're going to see for this particular individual. So, using that information, I solicited the efforts of Joe Mullins, who's also at the Missing Children Center, and using this state-of-the-art system of technology in which you're doing facial reconstruction virtually rather than putting the clay on the skull like you see in other the early CSIs. He's rebuilding this face. So taking the CT scan, and this is in 3 dimensions, he can rotate this thing around. He relocates the eyes, puts on the underlying muscle tissues that are there, then puts in the lower underlying glands and things like that, the ears, starts putting on the tissue, adds some hair, opens up the eyes so he doesn't look like dead, and produces this image here. And Kim also said, was he autopsy? No, this is a tunic that he's wearing here. But here gives a visage of this individual, and this is in 3-dimensional space. And I don't know how many of you have seen what is called rapid prototyping, printing. You take a 3-dimensional image, and you can then, with the XYZ coordinates, run it through a machine that makes a 3-dimensional image. And so here on exhibit is a bust, that same thing of that child, that now is there for us to be able to see the virtual face, the actual face or visage of this child. And this gives us a chance to have a concrete way to reconnect with this young boy, and the public to reconnect with this young boy, to reach over 1,000 years, a couple thousand years, and be able to get some feeling about this small child and his life and his laughter. I love this picture of this girl just ready to burst out laughing. And that he was loved in ancient Egypt. So, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I hope that some of this was interesting. I don't know if there's time, probably questions, but